Welcome to the Meat and Potatoes podcast. We're here with Alema Harrington, who is the co-founder of A-Game and a counselor. You'll say the specific part at Ardu.
Yeah.
How are you?
SUDC, Substance Use Disorder Counselor.
There you
and
go.
For those in that industry, that's the old LSAC, and was I was kind of grandfathered in with when I went through my schooling. So I have my bachelor's degrees from BYU, but I have my counseling degrees from UVU. So I'm a Wolverine. I'd like to let people know that I'm a Wolverine. I'm a UVU alum.
Yeah, and that is with each passing day a better and better school to be a part of.
Yeah.
They're doing a lot of really cool things. Well, thank you for joining. A lot of folks listening will recognize your voice. You've been in sports broadcasting for many, many years, probably decades.
Yeah.
Right? And obviously at Ardu, and then A-Game's fairly new.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about all of it.
Yeah.
Let's jump in a little bit with Ardu. What is it, and why are we going to be talking about that on kind of a business-oriented podcast?
Well, for us, one of the challenges that I think the recovery industry faces as it relates to the tech world is there's kind of a new employee that you're dealing with, and the question sometimes is how do we get services to these people? So at Ardu, one of our goals is to be able to be a preferred provider for any of these groups that are out there, regardless of what your employee group looks like. You might have some independent contractors and then other people that are on salary with different benefits. And what we want to make sure that people know is that we have services that can take care of any of those people. And the biggest thing being that as employers, and you're looking at, okay, we have somebody that's struggling, or you might not even know. And you and I had a conversation about there are a lot of resources out there, but sometimes people in the HR department, there's all the resources, but I still don't really know what to do. And the easier thing to do would be to identify, and we can help people because we provide education on how to identify addiction in the workplace, but to be able to turn it over and say, well, this is our preferred provider, and we can pick it up from there and then help those people get the services they need. And the goal being to get them the treatment that they need and then allow them to come back into the workplace. And for employers, it's understanding, people in the HR world know this, trying to replace any employee is going to be very expensive with the onboarding and everything else that's involved. But if we can get that person the right treatment, then it's going to be cost effective, number one. But number two, my experience is when that person returns to the workplace, they're going to be really the best selves that they've ever been, but probably, one of your best employees because of the things that they've been able to change in their own personal lives as a result of going through addiction recovery treatment.
Yeah. And that would involve drugs, alcohol, mental health.
Mental health too. And for us, I think that one of the biggest challenges we face in the business world, or in our world just generally speaking, is mental health. And some might think or wonder, is that just because we're more aware of it now? Or there are other things that are factors that have caused this? And in the end, I'm not sure if any of that matters. What matters is that we're dealing with it. And so whether, it's drugs or alcohol or relationships or a mental health crisis, being able to support companies in the treatment of employees in that regard, and Ardu, we treat the whole person. And so it's a holistic approach. And there's different things that we do that you might not find at other treatment facilities. And so we just want people to know that at Ardu, they're going to get the treatment they need. And they'll also get some treatments that are a little avant-garde. At the same time, you'll still be receiving the treatment that is traditional and time-proven and evidence-based. So, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, a lot of innovation in treating this over the years.
Yeah.
A lot of things that are kind of proven to work, some that have proven to not work that well. But, like we can speak in generalities because this is a half an hour podcast, but mental health, you might, associate that with homelessness or people yelling at you on the street. and that's obviously a part of it. But there's people working as product managers and sales leaders that might be showing up hungover or really depressed or really anxious. And if you're going to do brass tacks, they're probably not doing their job as good as they could. Maybe they're getting abused verbally or physically at home. And, that impacts businesses big and small, right? Yeah. Even if it's a big company, it's going to be a smaller team working on a project. And in all likelihood, the team members care about that person. But they also can't have somebody kind of bringing down the project, right? Yeah. So it's like you've got these two issues that they're trying to resolve. And I think, based anecdotally of people talking, behind the scenes, like it's a lot easier now than it used to be to say, I've got a problem. And that you raise your hand, whereas before you might not have. And to your point earlier, whether it's a company that has HR or doesn't, because a lot don't, you got to make a call or push them in some certain direction and hopefully get them on the mend. And to your point again, they're going to appreciate that. And when they do come back, they'll be hitting their deadlines and probably pretty grateful and thankful and loyal. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear this in the recovery industry all the time, that drugs and alcohol, for the people that are struggling with addiction, drugs and alcohol are not the problem. Drugs and alcohol have been the solution to that person's problem. And for me, as a person in long-term recovery, drugs and alcohol were my solution to my insecurity and my anxiety. And so what we do is if you follow the path of how most people get lost in addiction, I tell people all the time, it's like people who are addicts and alcoholics, in my experience, are very talented and resourceful and intelligent people. And so you don't use drugs and alcohol because it doesn't work. You use it because it works. Now, the insanity of addiction is after it stops working to continue to do it. And that's how addiction kind of differentiates itself from other diseases, because it's one, if not the only, that will try to convince you that you don't have it.
Right.
And so you continue to use and try to figure out, like, how can I keep using when that ship has sailed already and it's time to try something different. But for most of us, certainly for me, I needed some guidance and some direction and some structure to be able to, number one, get separated from the drugs and alcohol. And then after that separation from my solution, what at one time was my solution, I had to be introduced in a very aggressive way, really, to something different, a new solution. And the new solution is for me, has been the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is nothing groundbreaking or new. These principles have been around, for since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not that I hadn't been introduced to those principles before, because I grew up in religion and in a good home, and so I had exposure to that. But it didn't really make sense to me until I was in a treatment center and, separated from drugs and alcohol, and then given these principles in that context. And it really hit home for me.
Yeah. And I'm not sure when, you went into treatment and all of that. You mentioned long-term, but you were fairly successful, I would imagine, when you did that, right? And a lot of people listening, and they've got friends that they do make a great salary. They actually have like a great lifestyle.
Yeah.
So they might be perhaps a little like, I got this squared away, a little bit more egotistical than somebody digging ditches, right? Where it's like, I clearly.
Yeah, or the person on the street.
Yeah.
Right.
So it seems to me maybe even a little bit harder for somebody making a great living who's achieved most of their goals to acknowledge that.
Well, the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous is that we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, that unmanageable piece is kind of the thing that people are struggling with, because you think that, well, because I still have this salary, I still have my home, I still have my cars, and I still have my family, that it's manageable. When the truth is, it became unmanageable a long time ago. certainly there was powerlessness involved way before it gets completely unmanageable.
Yeah.
So it's trying to identify that. People always ask, well, do they have to hit rock bottom? Well, rock bottom is a relative term, and you can stop this progression at any point, but you have to really be committed to this is unmanageable. Like, I could keep going like this maybe for, whoever knows how long. But the bottom line is, at some point, it's got to end.
Yeah.
And why not stop today and get the help or the treatment that I need?
Yeah. And I know you guys have a lot of offerings and products and solutions, but we can't hit on all of them. But in general, it's a certain amount of time, right? And a certain strategy relates to each person and their addiction. What are a few of the key timelines and strategies just at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, typically what you want to be able to get somebody to commit to is a 30-day program. And now that has grown, though that number has grown as we've seen the results and the evidence, 45 is better, 60 days is better. Like, what can that person afford to spend as far as time is concerned? And then that's always, balanced with, well, I can't really, somebody says like myself, I can't afford to go to treatment for 30 days. Well, the bottom line is I can't afford not to.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is a disease that is both progressive and fatal.
Yeah.
So I got, whatever it's going to take. We wouldn't say that if there's dealing with cancer. It's like, well, however long the treatment of the protocol calls for, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I think, when it comes to addiction or mental health, we think, well, what's the minimum I can do, instead of being very thorough with it.
Yeah.
So 30 days, 45 days, but the key, which, we do at Ardu, is make sure that that person not only gets residential treatment, but that goes into, and these are our clinical terms, but PHP, partial hospitalization, which is day treatment. So you're not on facility anymore, but you're still going on a daily basis, then intensive outpatient, and then continued counseling. And what we've seen as far as success is concerned, the people that can stay committed to a program for a year have a better chance of success.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if you only go for 30 days and just residential treatment, chances of success are very low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Starting point, at least, though, and I like that analogy with cancer. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'll do it for 3 days.
Yeah.
Right? No, you probably go longer. All right. So then a lot of things in your life tie in together, right?
Yeah.
Ardu, A-Game, Utah Jazz, BYU. Let's shift gears a little bit into A-Game. A little bit of the founding story there, because this is like the entrepreneurial side right, of Alema. So what is it?
Well, the A-Game Institute was created really 15 years ago. My brother and I, actually, I found myself in a situation where I had a contract to do a radio show. I just moved back after going through treatment in Hawaii. I just moved back to Utah, and I was doing a radio show. I wasn't on TV anymore. I had lost my TV job in the process of my relapse. And so I had a contract to do a radio show, and then just kind of suddenly that contract was yanked, and I didn't have a contract. And so found myself in a position where it's like, well, what do I do now? I was able to negotiate with the radio station, and I pulled the contract to be able to get 2 hours of radio time and do my own show. And it was from 5 o'clock or from 7 o'clock in the evening till 9 o'clock. And we thought, okay, let's go ahead and try this radio format or program, and we'll call it A-Game. And it was based on, Alema being my name and the A-Game. And at that time, it was kind of right when Tiger Woods was starting to really use that phrase a lot. Well, I didn't have my A-Game, or I brought my A-Game. And people were using that as a reference to being at their peak performance. And so we started doing a radio show that was basically a sports radio show, but it evolved into this A-Game platform that was a motivational platform. And then over the years, it has continued to develop where we have multiple offerings as far as presentations are concerned, But the A Game Institute is committed to the study and of peak performance and being able to help people and companies achieve that in their lives. And it's based on my personal experience and a lot of failures, but also as a sports broadcaster and a former athlete, watching and observing both teams, individuals, companies, and seeing like what are the commonalities here for these people to be able to be successful. And so we have multiple offerings. One is the 7 C's of Success, which is relatively new, that we've just rolled out, which is a tribute to my father in a lot of ways, because it follows the early Polynesian voyagers and them populating the Pacific Ocean. And so the 7 C's of success are all C's. They start with the letter C. But the most important one, which is where our foundation is culture. And it's about trying to identify and curate and develop a culture, both individually, but as a company, as an organization. And culture is such a critical part of anybody's success. And if you look at this, I found this as I studied the early Polynesians. One of the guys that was a part of the Renaissance in Hawaii to kind of identify what that culture was, because Hawaii had lost its culture in the process of becoming part of the United States, which was a very good thing for Hawaii and the Polynesian people to become part of the United States. And at the same time, there was a give and take there, and they lost their culture in the process. As they were rediscovering their culture, a guy named Nainoa Thompson, who was an early captain on the Hokulea, which was a voyaging canoe that was part of this Renaissance. As he was looking at culture, he said, culture is not necessarily heritage. It's not a race. Culture is about values. And so what we've done with the 7 C's of Success and with the A Game Institute is try to identify what those values are. And, there are common values with companies and individuals that are successful. And then we want to be able to present those in a way that are entertaining and at the same time applicable, things that people can actually do.
Yeah. And so folks that should listen to this could be individuals, corporations, schools, church groups, pretty much anyone that has to develop culture.
We're contracted with Skyridge High School here locally, very successful high school, relatively new. And they're bringing us in to help consult and curate with them, right, their culture. So we spent a lot of time with the administration and with the thought leaders there at the school and trying to understand, okay, share with us what your culture is. Like, what is it, right? And there's certain things that connection and caring that are part of their culture that we will present and to their student body that will allow the student body to connect with that and be able to say, okay, this is what it means to be, a Skyridge Skyhawk. Mm-hmm. And so the same thing would be applicable whether it was, a business or an organization, or for people individually with their families, or, a person individually. Like, what is my culture? Is trying to identify what the values are in my personal life that are part of my culture. And if I can really identify those and really work on those things, then I elevate my chances of success.
Yeah. Because, there's 8 billion people in the world, lots of different cultures, lots of different mindsets on culture. But it seems like even if you're brand new in a country or in an organization, you can kind of inherently feel if it's a good culture or not.
Yeah.
And you've experienced a lot of different cultures, right? Mm-hmm. Growing up in Hawaii, playing football for BYU, broadcast sports, all these different, recovery centers.
Yeah.
For you, how quick can you kind of know, like, good culture, they got room for improvement, or this is a dumpster fire?
Well, a lot of times those things will speak for themselves. if the company is successful. Now, there's companies that can be successful and even sustain that for a period of time with poor culture.
Yeah.
But as a company that establishes culture and then loses it along the way. We've all seen companies that it's like, man, what happened to that company? They kind of lost their way. Well, they lost their culture.
Yeah.
And so you can identify that pretty rapidly. And the same thing as it relates to, again, the addiction that we talked about earlier. At what point has it become unmanageable? And when do we need to bring in, some sort of response to the unmanageability? And so we look at it as an opportunity as we meet with companies or with schools and organizations. Like, what do you think your culture is? How do you feel like it's working? What can we do to support you in curating that culture in a way that is going to allow you to be more successful? And I've had so many different experiences with that. When I was at BYU, there was a certain culture. We won a national championship in 1984, and the curator of that culture really was Lavelle Edwards. Mm-hmm. I look at my experience with the Jazz, and I've been in the broadcast business now for going on 30 years. So I was around for Stockton and Malone. There was a very identifiable culture that was part of that team, right? And which included the leadership of the Miller family, and then, of course, Jerry Sloan, and then Stockton and Malone.
Yeah.
And you could identify that culture from Larry Miller all the way down. And now we have a new culture that is being established with the Utah Jazz, with Ryan Smith and Danny Ainge and Dwayne Wade, and with guys that have been there, like a Justin Zanuck. And the culture now is as important as it ever was. And it continues to evolve and change with Will Hardy as your new head coach. And there's different things that as you watch it develop, and I get a chance to have kind of a front row seat to watch this thing develop. You see the importance of how that culture is established. I was mentioning to you, I was listening to a radio interview earlier yesterday, and they were talking about the Jazz, and obviously the Jazz are in a very transitional type of position right now, where we've lost our two All-Stars, or we traded them away, and we have a new head coach, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we establish the culture? And somebody was, the interviewer was asking one of the beat writers about the culture and how important it was in relation to Jordan Clarkson. And Jordan Clarkson is a culture in and of himself, right? And the response was, well, I don't know how important the culture is right now. The culture is always important.
Yeah. And
especially when you have a team where you're trying to figure out, okay, where we're going to go as far as draft picks are concerned. Are we going to tank as a team? That's a dangerous thing to establish as your culture, a losing culture.
Yeah.
And so, I've had enough interaction with the new head coach and with the administration and the front office, understanding that you cannot afford to establish a losing culture.
Yeah.
Or losing as part of your culture.
Yeah.
So regardless of what it's a team or a company or an organization, that culture is always important. There's never a time in your lifespan as a company where, we don't have to worry about the culture right now.
Right.
Right. You always do.
Yeah. Because all things being equal, right, they're planning to grow the team
Mm-hmm.
and transition, whatever it is. But I guarantee there's dozens, if not hundreds of experiences in sports, we'll use that, where, like, this team isn't good.
Yeah.
And turns out they were. So the culture needs to be established, because you never know. The Jazz might win the NBA championship next year. The pundits would say otherwise, but who knows?
Yeah.
Right? It's happened before where it's, there's the bad news bears.
Yeah, and athletics, just like any organization, obviously you want to bring in, as far as employees are concerned, like we want all the top draft picks. We want all the people that have proven success and to bring them into the company. At the same time, we've seen situations where the talent was average, but the culture was pristine.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And those companies are able to succeed in spite of talent that may have been graded as subpar, because their culture promoted the best out of every one of those individuals. And part of the culture, and one of the 7 seasons of success after culture is commitment.
Yeah.
And those types of things are so important to be able to have somebody that's committed to the team as opposed to just selfishly looking out for themselves.
Yeah.
And if you have those types of people, then you can be successful even if your talent level isn't, on a scale of, stars isn't 5-star.
Yeah.
So it can be done.
Absolutely. And I think a good example is the service academies, reading sports biographies, over the years of, they could be 50, 60 years old or even 40. Like if they bring up the Air Force, Navy, or Army, it's always like, I was really sore after that game. We lost, or we barely beat them. We should have beat them by 500 points. But it's like time and time again, right? Like that was one of the hardest games.
Yeah.
And you can see that after the games of the mutual respect, because it's not a level playing field as far as talent there.
Yeah, it's based on their commitment, and it's based on, other, C's and the 7 C's cooperation and those types of things. But I can tell you from personal experience, having played against Fisher DeBerry and the Air Force Academy, that team who, everybody was undersized, but that team came with it every game, and they won their share.
Yeah.
I remember going into, I want to say it was my sophomore season, and we were going up against an Air Force team at the end of the year who was a top 10 ranked team, the Air Force Academy, right, under Fisher DeBerry. But it was because they were so committed to each other and really to what their goals were, and so they were disciplined. And that's what you want from your service academies is guys that have those qualities. But if you're looking at the way that they were able to achieve success, and we're seeing, well, how can we duplicate that? Well, we can duplicate that. We might not have the top recruits in the country, but we do have this culture that is going to allow us to be able to get the best out of every employee or every person in our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I assume for you, like, person that studied culture, seen a lot of them, it'll be fun to watch the Utah Jazz over the next couple of years as their culture develops. So you've got like your job with the Jazz, but you also get to kind of observe and learn how it goes. All right, so with the A game, it also involves you guys having a culture.
Yeah.
Being entrepreneurs, getting new business, all of that. What does it look like when you guys come on as a partner or service provider with these groups?
Well, for us, and our team includes myself, my brother, my oldest son Durant, and then we have a couple of guys that we've partnered with who have plenty of experience in the marketing world and the fulfillment world in James Wall and Ryan Van Dorn. You may know them from their company, Tri-Day Trading. And so what we do is we look at a company, and when they bring us in, then we meet with their main leadership council and find out, okay, where do you think your culture is right now? And then we can consult with them on what we're seeing or not seeing, and then we work in partnership with that group to bring a message for their employees of how do we establish this culture. And it's not the culture that we're not bringing it, right? We're bringing the principles, but we're bringing that together in partnership in a collaboration with that leadership group. We want the company to be able to do that.
Yeah.
It would be presumptuous for us to think that we're going to tell you what your culture needs to be.
Yeah.
So we want to support the company in building that culture.
Yeah.
But it starts off with that meeting and trying to identify what their culture is. And some already have a mission statement. And you can look at the mission statement and say, well, are you guys adhering to this? What are the principles contained in there? And then we build from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. I'm unfortunately a little bit old enough now where I can remember, cultures changing.
Yeah.
Whether it's the big General Electric or, that were kind of the kings in the 80s and 90s. But they're not going to quit and lay down. They're going to change cultures, reinvent things. And similar, like with, recovery and alcoholism or whatever it is, like at some point you got to bite the bullet and change.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's interesting because we look at, as you're talking about our culture changing, I think, we look at the landscape of what, business looks like. And there's pendulum swings that go back and forth. And and it's interesting, at least to me, studying it, because there's so much commonality here in the centrist part of it, but we swing back and forth. And even as we've swung different directions here and looking at there's been a real people clamoring for some diversity, equity, and inclusion type of program, and trying to figure out like what does that look like, and one of the things that the A Game Institute is able to provide is some coaching in that realm that allows people to feel like, okay, we're getting that diversity, equity, and inclusion coaching and consulting handled in a way that actually doesn't feel offensive, and it's actually comfortable. Sometimes I think we look at these changes that need to be made, and it's got to be uncomfortable. Like, we need to make sure that people are really feeling awkward about this. That's not the case. And for us, for me personally, coming from the Polynesian background, this idea of aloha goes a long way, and aloha really speaks to this inclusion and making sure that everybody feels a part of.
Yeah.
And so being able to bring those types of principles to a company that I think can improve the way that people feel about their company, like I feel a part of.
Yeah.
And we were talking, earlier before jumping on Mike, just about what addiction really is. And the opposite of addiction, they say, is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And so it's being able to find ways to connect to, my coworker, connect to somebody in my family, connect to somebody in the community. Those are the things that we're trying to build, because when people feel connected, they're happier, but they perform better.
Yeah.
Right? Because your purpose is higher than just something individual.
Absolutely. Push comes to shove, if you got a group that's connected,
Yeah.
it's a lot harder to break.
Yeah.
Whether it's 10,000 people or just 5.
Yeah.
Right? That one's pretty eternal.
Yeah. And that's what, again, we go back to teams and what we've seen in the sports world over the years. I can tell you, having been on that 1984 national championship team, that team was connected. Not that there wasn't great talent on that team, which there was, and plenty of guys that went to the NFL. But if you're looking at, okay, the competition, like a team that we beat Michigan in the Holiday Bowl that year, or Pitt in the first game of that season, they had more talent.
Yeah.
But this team, under Coach Lavelle Edwards, over years of curating that culture, developed a culture that was capable of winning and performing beyond really what they were, could have achieved without that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I knew this would be fun and delightful, and it's been a great conversation, and you're wearing a lot of hats. So I think you have a lot of chances to be connected with a lot of really cool projects and really cool people. Thank you for taking the time. And for those interested in Ardu, where could they go?
Ardu Recovery.com or Ardu.com. And the A Game Institute is at the agameinstitute.com. Real easy.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Alema.
Thank you.